Hey everybody, Robert with RC Archery, and you're watching Patreon only content. Today's video, I'm going to be going over how I set up my arrows whenever I'm creating new ones for whatever I'm doing. For today's, I'm using 3D arrows. So these are some Black Eagle PS23 arrows, using the 23 series for a couple different reasons. One is speed coming out of the bow. I want to have enough speed to get the sight taped the way that I want in the gaps and everything. I'm going to shoot a known class, so I wasn't too hung up on speed, but I'm using the exact same bow for my 3D setup as what I use in my indoor. So it's only at 57 pounds peak weight, so I'm not pushing out just a ton of feet per second, and these are going to help me get a little bit better to what I want. Now the other reason I'm using a 23 series is because in a known class, for at least for amateur divisions and around locally where I'm going to be shooting in our Texas ASA series, the average average distance rather isn't extremely long. So when I get to the closer up targets, especially, I want to be able to put my arrow inside the 12 rings without having to worry about it glancing out as much and without having to stuff just a huge arrow shaft in there. So that's at least my plan going forward at this point. That may change later on. I may decide I want the diameter of a larger arrow and go back to PS26s and just set them up differently for 3D versus my indoor setup. But this is what I got. These are top hat points that I've got on the end of these. They're 120 grain points with they're screw-in weights that are 30 grains of brass. So 150 point weight total. Everything on here, Black Eagle Nocks, inserts and everything. I found these to work extremely well on the PS26s that I'm using, and I want to try these out when it comes to actually shooting them for 3D. So these are points here with top hat that supposedly when you shoot them into a target, it's supposed to pull them into an arrow shaft versus deflecting them out. So we'll see. Sounds pretty cool. It's got a extremely tight point at the end, so it works really well. And these arrows are extremely the weight and everything are extremely well made. All the components, everything on here, I'm less than 1 grain difference between all 6 of my arrows. So I'm incredibly happy with this setup, and it was the exact same through the PS26s. And honestly, the PS26s I got within 0.2 of a grain. These I believe are 0.3 or 0.4, I don't remember for sure, but they're all extremely close. The process that I use and what I set up with these bows is probably a little different from what a lot of people use. I'm not going to go through and float arrows. I don't spine test them. I don't do anything like that. The reason being is I've done that in the past. I've had them set up that way through multiple different ways, and I've still had to shoot them through paper, and I've still had to adjust them. So what I do is I just spine index with the Nock. So I'm basically Nock indexing what I'm doing with my arrows. And I do this because I want them to flex out of the bow the exact same way on every single arrow that I shoot. And what I'll do is I shoot an arrow through paper, see what tear I'm getting, and then I start adjusting the Nock. So at first I'll just shoot it where it is, I'll flip it over to 180, judge how it's doing, and then I start turning them in quarter turns and then micro it down from there. And I'm gonna try to get a bullet hole just spinning these arrows around if I can. If I can, I'm gonna get them as close to a bullet hole as I can, and then I'll go through and start tuning the bow and actually getting them to a bullet hole through paper. I do all this at 6 feet, not a huge paper tuner. I don't do a lot of extra work on this, and I'll immediately move to fletching these arrows, and then after that, I'll shoot them through paper again just to make sure there's not any contact or weird arrow flight, and then I'll start tuning them outdoors and start grouping them and shooting them. So that's my setup whenever I'm using new arrows, what I'm doing with these bows. Hope that'll give you an idea of how I'm setting up an arrow and what I'm doing with them, and give you an idea of how you can do yours at home and not have to have $200 fancy equipment. That's make the arrows, shoot them through paper, adjust the Nocks.